The best team in college football may not be in the national championship game. There was an odds maker that came out and said that Georgia, if they were in the playoffs this year, they would be favored over every single body. And if they were in the national championship game, they would be a 2-point favorite over Michigan. And this isn't the first time I've heard this. I've seen a lot of Georgia fans say this to me in the comment section, how if they were in the college football playoffs, they would be the favorite to win it all. Here's the thing about this, right? If Georgia is fully healthy, you do have a case of them being considered to be in that conversation to be the number one team in college football. All right, we know that Georgia coming into this past season was the favorite to win it all. Now, they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Some people will say that Alabama just outplayed them. They looked better coached. They were better prepared. And Georgia fans would push back against that. And they would tell you, man, the only reason Alabama won that game was because we weren't at full strength. We didn't have a fully healthy Brock Bowers. We were depleted at wide receiver. So if Georgia's fully healthy, and let's say hypothetically we play into this scenario, they're in the college football playoffs right now, would they truly be better than Washington? Okay. Yeah, you got an argument over that. They would be a better team than Washington just because of how stout they are up front on both sides of the football. Cool. Would they be better than Alabama? Absolutely. If they were to play Alabama again, they would be a favorite in that game. They were a favorite when they played against Alabama in the SEC championship game. Against Texas, they definitely would be a favorite over them. May not be by a huge margin, but it'd probably be by maybe 1-2 points. Against Michigan, as this odds maker put it out, hypothetically, they would be a 2-point favorite. So does Georgia really have a case for being considered the number one team in college football this season, despite not being in the national championship? I really got to say no. All right, because if you are the best team in college football, it doesn't always revolve around how many of your starters are healthy. If you truly are the best team in this sport, you got to have elite depth. And with Georgia having some key injuries to their starters, they didn't have that top level depth that you expect out of a team like Georgia that brings in arguably the best recruiting class damn near every single season. You see, odds makers, when they are making these games, they are strictly going off talent and what they see off paper and analytics. But when these games actually get played, I believe that Georgia wouldn't just roll through everybody like how Georgia fans would suggest. I don't think their secondary is as good as what it's been in the past. Going up against a team like Washington, I definitely still believe that they will be able to have a lot of success against you. Going up against this year's Michigan team, this isn't the Michigan team that you beat the shit out of back in 2021. This is a Michigan team that is just as good as any other team in college football, and they may just be better than what you were this past season up front with how good their offensive line and defensive play was this season. Your defensive line play took a big step back when you had two historically great ones this past 2 seasons. Georgia, to me, if they were in the college football playoffs, I don't think that they would be better than everybody. All right, I still believe that this year's Michigan team is just as good as anybody else in college football. And for the people who say that this is the best team in college football despite not being a national title, I got to strongly disagree with you, man. Like, if you were the best team in college football, you would be in the playoffs right now because you would be undefeated. Washington had injuries. Texas had some injuries. Texas lost their RB1, who's going to be one of the highest drafted running backs in next year's draft class. Injuries are a part of the game, and you got to be able to overcome them. And you were going up against a Bama team that most people consider to be one of the worst that Nick Saban has ever had to make it into the college football playoffs. And if it wasn't for Michigan having all those damn turnovers, you know, like, they probably would have beat Alabama by at least maybe 10 or more points. You see, when you went up against Alabama in the SEC championship game, their defense slowed down your offense. That was the least effective that Georgia's offense had looked all season long. Now, of course, that was due to injuries, but what about on the defensive end of things? You weren't able to find a way to consistently stop Jalen Milroe, who pretty much got neutralized against Michigan. You saw what they tried to do on the final play of that game in overtime. They got stuffed. And not just that, but how couldn't you beat Alabama when they had major issues on the offensive line? Their offensive line has been dog shit for around like the last 3-4 seasons. And Nick Saban owns Georgia. He's 5-1 against this team. Like, I picked Georgia to win it all before this season started. All right. And when I release my end of the season top 25, you're going to be in my top 3. But I'm not just going to say that you would be the number 1 team in college football based off this hypotheticals. There's a reason why the games get played. And the only reason I'm talking about this is because I've seen a lot of Georgia fans bring this up in my comment section, especially when they clobber FSU and the Orange Bowl. They keep saying, oh, we're the best team in college football. We'll be favored over everybody. Like, the only reason you would be favored over everybody is because, first of all, your name's Georgia, and because of analytics and what people see on paper. But when the games actually get played, if you would have went up against Texas or Michigan or whoever else, Washington, I don't think you would be a lock to win it. And if you were in the playoffs this year, I don't think you would have been a lock to win it all. Like, this Georgia team is good, or they were good this season, but they weren't as good as what they have been in previous seasons. All right? So for all of the Georgia fans that keep on saying, well, Oddsmakers will have us favored over anybody else in the playoffs, like, that is true, but that's not rooted in anything that we really can go off of and lock it in as a fact, because it's not a fact. Like, you only would be a favorite because your name's Georgia, the helmet that's on your logo, and what you done. You got to play these games. And Washington and Michigan are both in the national championship, despite not being ranked inside of 247 Sports Team Talent Composite rankings, not recruiting at the same level that you do. They use the transfer portal pretty well. They have great coaching staffs. Kalen DeBoer is one of the best coaches in college football. If you would have played Washington, that would have been an incredible matchup, because Kalen DeBoer, Kirby Smart, that would have been a great coaching battle. Who would have won that thing? We don't really know. I still would have took Washington over you. I still don't believe that your defense is as good as what many of you Bulldogs fans try to lead on. So somebody sent me this on Instagram. Oddsmakers say Georgia would be favored over everybody in the college football playoffs. The best team didn't make the national championship. I got to lock that in as false, man, because if you truly were the best team in college football, you would have found the way to beat Alabama in the SEC title game. Like, Washington had hella injuries during the first half of the season. Like, there was a stretch like 3 to 4 weeks in the middle of the season when Washington wasn't at full strength. They were at like 60, 75% at one point. They had the damn flu going around in their locker room. So it's like, I get the fact that Georgia was without some of their best players in the SEC championship game. But at the same time, you're Georgia. You recruit damn near at number 1 or number 2 in the nation every single season. One guy goes down, another guy should be able to step up and be productive. Alabama's defense was really good, but their offense was not that great. And the way their offense looked against you in the SEC championship was really surprising. Like, you expect better defensive play out of Georgia's defense. So I don't think that Georgia is the best team in college football just because the Oddsmakers say they will be favored over everybody. Like, Alabama was an underdog against Michigan. They lost that game. But you were favored against Alabama in the SEC championship, and you lost that game. Washington was a 4-point underdog against Texas, and they won that game. Like, you just can't judge how good a team is based on what these odds say. That's why we bet on these things. That's why Vegas loses money, and that's why they gain money. People are wrong about these things. The odds don't show how the games would go or what the outcome would be. They just give you a metric to go off of. So I don't agree with this narrative that Georgia fans are trying to throw around, that they have a case for being the best team in college football just because they would be favored over everybody in the college football playoffs. And I have seen a few Georgia fans comment this in my comment section.